Hi guys. All right. So what I want to do is you guys were given a paper. You were given this page, and we're gonna go through and talk about like we normally would in class. Go through, highlight, underline the important things because this page right here is going to help you on your blue book homework tonight. Okay, because you're gonna see a lot of these terms and a lot of these terms in your homework. So you need to understand what they mean. So it's kind of like a little cheat sheet for you. So you'll take this home so that you can use it to help you. All right, so the first thing we're going to go over, which is just a genre overview over everything that your homework's over. So we're going to go through this first part talks about fiction and realistic fiction. Okay, we all know that fiction stories are not real stories. Remember that F at the beginning means that it's fake. Okay, so right here, we're going to highlight the word fiction, and we're going to highlight the part that says that it is made up because we know it's fake. Okay, the next part that we've talked about is a realistic fiction story. So I want you to go ahead and highlight that as well. Realistic fictions are stories that are also, we've got that word fiction in there. We know that fiction is made up. So we know that fiction is made up. We also know that the story, since it's realistic, real, that it could take place in real life. Okay, sometimes a story will also include other types of text, such as maybe some advertisements, email correspondence, or informational flyers that are written for a particular point of view. This additional text can make the story seem more realistic. So, like on your STAR test, when you see maybe a story that has an advertisement trying to sell bars of soap, okay, it may not be a real advertisement, but it gives it a more realistic look. It makes the story seem like it's actually real to you. Okay. It also is giving you new information. The next part is we're going to talk about in your fiction stories that there's always at least one character. Okay. Every story has at least one character. You're going to also have at least one setting and plot. Okay, so your setting, remember, is where your story is taking place. Your plot is the events, the series of events that make up your story. Okay, so it's the whole story kind of put together. These elements are organized into what we call a story structure, kind of how the story is set up. The author will put them together in a way that will best tell you your story. When it's time for you to summarize a story, we've used summary, we've talked about summary. Okay, when it's time for you to summarize a story, that is when you retell, and I like that word right there, the main events. Okay, I don't want all the fluff, and that's what the next part tells you. It wants you to leave out the details that do not advance the story significantly. Okay, so again, I don't want those minor little details that really don't make a big deal. Like if we're talking about a story about a dog who gets lost and or a dog was playing out in the yard and it mentions him wearing a red collar. Well, if that's the only time it mentions it and there's no real significance to the red collar, you don't need to mention that part to me. Okay? All right, the next part talks about as you are reading them, you need to be able to identify your characters. Okay, so when you read a fiction story, you always want to identify them. Now, there's some questions that you can ask yourself. Maybe, who is the story mostly about? And when we ask that question, if the story is mainly about one person, we call that person our main character. Okay. Often you'll have to make an inference about why the characters act and speak as they do. Okay. Remember, inference is just kind of like your conclusion. Like you're taking the information that's given to you and you're kind of inferring, oh, this is what they're like, or oh, this is how they're feeling because what they're saying. Okay. It may help you to paraphrase your information. Okay. And when you paraphrase information, that is when you're restating what happens using your own words. And I think a lot of you, when we do summaries or when we paraphrase what happened in the chapter or what they said, a lot of you try to take it word for word from the book or the story. Okay. When you paraphrase, it's your own words. All right, the next thing that we're going to talk about is our setting. We know that setting is where our story's taking place. So that could be the place, it could be the time, the weather, the year. Okay, it's always where the story is taking place. All right, ways that you can identify your setting. If you ask yourself, where and when does the story take place? Where are they at? If they're in Little Johnny's kitchen, okay, you can say they're at Johnny's house in his kitchen. All right, so your setting, remember, is where your story is taking place. We'll talk about plot. Plot is what makes up your story. It's all the events put together, okay? So for plot, I want you to go ahead and highlight here where it says what happens in a story. The plot is made up of a series of events. Your plot has your conflict, or another word that we use, your problem. Okay, and your conflict and your problem are always introduced at the beginning. Okay, why start a story and then at the very end learn that there's a problem? Okay, that's no fun. You want to know what's the issue going on, and that's what builds the suspense for you to read. By the end of the book, you want to know, okay, how did he solve his problem? Just like in our story Among the Hidden, we learned that Luke was a third child and he'd never been out of his house before. Okay, and he really wanted to be free. His problem was he was stuck in his house and he was a third child. So by the end of the book, we learned that he got to become Lee Grant. So we know that it is introduced at the beginning. Oh, sorry. All right, so as we read, we look for the events that move the action along. As we're moving through our rising action, we hit our climax, we hit our falling action, and then last but not least, we come to our resolution, or what we call our solution. Okay, and this is when we are able to solve the problem. So, I mean, you know, that word solution. If you have a solution to my issue, you're able to help me solve my problem that I have going on, or my issue that I have going on. Okay. The next part we're going to talk about is our narrator. This is when we get to who is telling the story. Okay. So our narrator is going to be the person telling your story. Now, your narrator is not always going to be the same person. Okay. So a narrator is the person who tells or narrates the story. It's the one talking. Okay, not the one like me reading it out loud. I would not be considered the narrator because I did not write it. Okay, so again, when we're trying to identify the narrator, we're looking for those key words, you know, like I, you, me, he, she, they. Okay, it's able to help you figure out who is, whose point of view are we in? Who is telling that story? All right. When a character tells a story, he or she, if the character is telling the story, maybe your main character, we call that person or that story, they are in first person. That means that they are the one telling the story. So they're going to use words like I, me, and we. Okay. First person, right here, it tells us I and we to tell the story. When a narrator is not the character or a character in the story, so like if it was just an outsider looking in, we would call them our third person. That means that they are playing no part in the story. They're just reading it. Okay, so a third person is the one telling the story using words. They're going to say things like he, she, they. They're going to use specific people's names. So we'll use those words. But the cool thing about third person is it's split off into two. I've talked about this before. We have third person omniscient, and third person limited. All right, so the first one we're going to talk about is third person omniscient. Now, third person omniscient is when your narrator, he knows the thoughts and the feelings for all the characters. Okay, so he knows the thoughts and the feelings of all the characters. Sorry about that, guys. All right, and then that last one is our third person limited. So remember I gave you guys the example, say that candy bars went on sale for a penny, but there's a limit that you can get of only 5. Okay, so if you put a limit on something, that means that you can only know a certain amount of it, or you can only have a certain amount of it. So for third person limited, we know that that narrator is only able to tell the thoughts and the feelings of one person. And that one person is going to be your main character. Okay, so now that we have finished going over this, guys, you're going to put this in your binder. This is going to help you tonight on your homework for your blue book. Okay, now on your blue book, and I will show you guys what your homework is going to look like. Okay, so your homework tonight is going to look a little like this. It is a fiction story, so you guys do not have to label it for me. But at the top is called The Case of the Glowing Glove. All right, so what you're going to do is you're going to read through, and as you're reading through, make sure you do your annotations. I was looking over your airplane stories tonight, and I did notice that a lot of you, you did not finish out your annotations. That is a part of your grade, guys. You will be graded on the annotation parts, and if you don't do that, that could cause you to fail the assignment, even if you get every single one of them right. Okay? Another thing that I noticed in your instructions today was to justify your answers. And let me explain what justify is. In science, you guys have to justify all of your answers for your test. Okay, and I know Miss Nolan has told me that. She has you guys do that, and I watched you do it on your benchmark. So your instructions for the airplanes assignment was to justify your answers. That means you're going to tell me, how did you get that answer? And I don't want you to just say, if you think it's D, say, oh, because his dog ran away. No, I want you to justify. Tell me, what paragraph did you find it in? Okay. You need to be highlighting keywords in the question or underlining keywords in the questions. Okay. So you need to make sure you do your annotations and you need to justify your answers. Okay. All of these should be able to go back in the story. I mean, here we are, we're working with summary. Remember to do your BME. Break each one down. Label it. Okay, beginning, middle, end over here. Okay, you're going to want to find, okay, where does it talk about this? Go label what paragraph you found it in. Where does it talk about this one? Go label it. Okay, and then look at your answer choices. Go find these in the story and see, oh, did they happen in the paragraph before this one or after? Because you're going to want the one that happens after. All right. Okay, so this one talks about going to the advertisement. You're going to look back at your advertisement that they had given you. All right, take your time, read carefully. Blue Book is a hard assignment. That's why I've given you a cheat sheet to help you go back and forth to look at. Okay, this will be due on Thursday when you guys come in to class.